National Mental Health Month is an initiative of the Mental Health Foundation Australia, called MHFA, to advocate for and raise awareness of Australian mental health as a community. The MHFA's National Mental Health Month is unlike many other mental health awareness campaigns. It aims to bring all Australians together in a nationwide conversation about mental health, and we aim to maintain this conversation for an entire month and beyond through a series of various mental health related events. National Mental Health Month is a program that the MHFA is extremely proud of, and we intend to reach out to and educate as many Australians as possible to help reduce stigma and facilitate positive and non-judgmental discussions surrounding the important topic of mental health in Australia. With 1 in 5 Australians experiencing mental health illness, it is time we give mental health its due attention, and that is exactly what the MHFA is wanting to achieve. Through this month, many events have been organized in each state and territory of Australia, aiming to attract and unite Australians of all ages and backgrounds to raise awareness of the need for better mental health for all. This year, the theme of National Mental Health Month is Post-Pandemic Recovery Challenges and Resilience. This year's theme will focus on raising awareness about mental health in various industries and communities. Every individual has faced, and many are still facing, unprecedented challenges due to the COVID-19 pandemic. With this in mind, we aim to extend our campaign even wider than previous years, with events planned to embrace many different community groups and people of all ages walking on the road to recovery and fostering resilience. So please join us in celebrating the Mental Health Foundation Australia by viewing a short video.
Hi everyone, I'm Vasan Srinivasan, Chairperson of the Mental Health Foundation Australia. It's a privilege to lead this wonderful community-based mental health organisation in its 91st year of establishment. The MHFA has grown strength to strength over the past few years, with Victorian Mental Health Month in 2018, the National Mental Health Month occurring in 2019, 2020 and this year in 2021. Last year, COVID-19 did not stop us from achieving our National Mental Health Month campaign. I'm proud to say we successfully shifted many events to a virtual platform, very much being able to pursue our objectives of raising awareness and advocating for better Australian mental health. Our primary aim is to reach out to and educate as many Australians as possible, to help reduce stigma and to encourage constructive and non-judgmental dialogue on Australia's critical mental health issue. The highlight of last year's campaign was reaching out to 100,000 Australians all across the country for our national walks for mental health, both virtually through our MHFA app and physically in some states. What a grand success that was. In 2021, with pandemic still affecting many of us, we decided not to give up once again, curating a carefully chosen blend of virtual and physical events for Australians to participate in. This year, we have a new and improved MHFA app, giving people the opportunity to participate in National Mental Health Month from the palms of their hands. This year, theme is Mental Health and Post-Pandemic Recovery Challenges and Resilience. Mental Health Foundation Australia is proud to partner with Australian technology business DB Resorts and take up the wellbeing app Am I OK? to support our members, enabling individuals to regularly check in on a private and secure platform and ask the question, Am I OK? Am I OK also alerts the user when it's time to seek outside help. We thank DB Results for this opportunity to promote well-being and early intervention. This year, we have launched a special initiative, the Mental Health Appeal on the 10th of October, our World Mental Health Day. Through this, we aim to raise funds for the development of a course promoting life and safety in young people. At the MHFA, we pride ourselves in making sure all our programs are for the community and powered by the community. We have a vast growing network of multicultural ambassadors, youth ambassadors, and future leaders who further the community voice in promoting mental health and well-being. Our multicultural network has inspired our educational and multicultural webinars as an initiative to assist individuals cope with success during the pandemic. I would like to take this moment to thank our board directors and patrons, scientific advisory committee members, our wonderful staff, multicultural and youth ambassadors, future leaders, MHFA members and major sponsors for their continuous support to our organization. As we continue to work to deepen understanding of the importance of mental well-being and educating the community, let's work in solidarity for the benefit of our mental health. Thank you, Australia.
Thank you. Oh. Hello. Yes, so thank you. That's a wonderful video of the Mental Health Foundation Australia spoken by our chairperson, Vasan Srinivasan. Now, I would like to invite our first speaker for today's event, Dr. Bronwyn Gresham. Dr. Bronwyn Gresham is a Melbourne-based registered clinical psychologist who is passionate about building individual and organizational resilience. In 2019, Dr. Gresham joined RMIT University as their senior advisor for mental well-being, where she has contributed to the clinical direction and evaluation for the RMIT Wellbeing Strategic Plan 2020 to 2025. In 2021, she stepped into the program lead role for mental well-being initiatives, where she oversees the delivery of the strategic plan, working with a multidisciplinary team of staff, including students, education and communication staff, as well as organized psychologists. Together, they endeavor to apply best practice for shifting the dial on community mental health and well-being, guided by the university frameworks and systems thinking. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Gresham.
Oh, thank you so much, Christina. That was such a beautiful introduction. And it is such a pleasure to be invited onto this panel, and just huge congratulations to the Mental Health Foundation of Australia. What an incredible suite of events and offerings over this past month, and to, ongoing. It's just so impressive because, more than ever, this kind of dialogue is needed. So thank you. Well, I'd like to also acknowledge, similar to Christina, that I'm speaking to you from the unceded land of the Wurundjeri people, and to pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and to acknowledge the intelligence that they bring around the interconnection between social, emotional, and environmental well-being. So for me, being part of this panel, it is a great honour, and I'm really coming here bringing an intention to learn and to be curious together, to engage in dialogue and participate. So as Christina mentioned, I lead a particular team within RMIT called the Mental Wellbeing Initiatives team. And we're sort of homed in the operations side of the university in health, safety and wellbeing, because our work covers staff and student initiatives. And we're really trying to bring the wellbeing of the community together rather than working with disparate and different populations. So the initiatives that we sort of lead in our area tap into the broad continuum of wellbeing, so to focus on things that promote our mental health and wellbeing, systems and processes that enable us to protect and prevent mental health and wellbeing from going to the more downstream distress end, and also enhancing our resources and supports. So we try to take that continuum approach to really build that community wellbeing. And we do work very closely with our colleagues across the university, like our university support service areas, our counselling service areas and our welfare advisors, mostly to keep things integrated and to work strategically together, but to also hear about what's happening from their perspective with students who are at that more distressed end of the continuum, to really get a sense of what's showing up for them at the moment. And I'll share a little bit about that soon. So as Christina mentioned, our approach is quite strategic. So we're guided by a 5-year strategic action plan, which, to be honest, has been a crucial guiding star. There's always so much to do in this space. It can be really overwhelming to know where to begin. And it sort of speaks to the fact that pre-COVID, we already knew that we had a big task on our hands around improving university staff and student mental health and wellbeing, as evidenced by various reports that I'm sure many people will be familiar with, but the most recent one being the Origin report, the Framework for University Mental Health and Wellbeing. But also to acknowledge that, you know, universities don't exist in a vacuum. We are part of the broader community, and we have also, you know, a whole suite of comprehensive information that was brought to us over the past few years, from the Royal Commission reports to the Productivity Commission reports into mental health and wellbeing. So I almost feel like we're at a time in history where we have collected a lot of rich information about the problems that we face, and we have, you know, a roadmap of ingredients required that we need to apply to shift the dial. But then, of course, the global health crisis hits, adding that into the mix, it really sort of threw us into the unknowns again, and I'm sure others will resonate with that. So I thought I'd share a little bit about how we initially approached that, and just end, because I'm sure there'll be many conversations from this panel on what's sort of showing up now and where to from here. So just a bit about how our team responded in the beginning. We were really trying to anticipate what the challenges might be ahead for students and staff, both connected to the pandemic itself, like fear and loss and separation, particularly for our international students or students living remote from home, and the impacts that were sort of connected to the public health responses, like all the learning disruptions and the isolation and the loneliness, financial stress, and even poverty for many people. So, you know, as in many, you know, crises that happen, there's such risk of overwhelm of communication and confusion. So our team sort of started by connecting with other parts of the university to come together to develop a whole of community campaign, a mental health promotion campaign that we called RMIT Together, to really try to enhance some of the protective factors that we'd need to really foster around communication, leadership voice, connection, and mental health literacy. So then that was sort of then, and I guess now as we finish up, well, coming to the end of another academic year, those who are from a higher education listening in, and also everyone on the panel, will know how this period of time is quite a high demand time in terms of workload, and students are coming to the end of the semester. And, you know, add to that various different experiences across the states around COVID and people wanting to know what's happening over Christmas. So, you know, what we're seeing showing up at the moment for students, but, you know, it has to stay for staff as well, is a collective sense of fatigue, of exhaustion, you know, people really struggling to stay motivated, frustration and uncertainty. And of course, you know, we're seeing different challenges for those who have been on campus versus studying completely remotely. And I guess I also want to acknowledge that not everyone is struggling psychologically or emotionally. There are some people who are very, you know, have a lot of inner resource and social resources that have protected them through this period of time. But, you know, reflecting on this, it does have to be acknowledged that the experience of this health pandemic, it has left a mark on us all to varying degrees. So this has become a part of each of our life stories. So, you know, today I'm really interested to see where this conversation goes and how, as a sector, we can respond to the diverse student needs, and even how we can really tap into and unlock the vast potential for our inner human resources like connection and resilience, in order just to kind of stumble away through, but also to try to grow from these challenging times. So that's probably enough from me. I'd love to hear from Christina and the other panels. I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Gresham. That was wonderful. And thank you for sharing your insights. So a token of appreciation will be posted to you, and we look forward to hearing from you later on at the panel discussion session. So thank you. So now it is my great pleasure to invite Dr. Debra Arth. Since completing her PhD in 2000, Debra has worked in academic positions at the University of Queensland and Griffith University. She has over 15 years experience in university teaching, in psychology, counseling, and education. In 2006, Debra was awarded an Early Career Teaching Excellence by Griffith University and a National Citation for Outstanding Contribution to Student Learning in 2008 by the Australian Learning and Teaching Council, ALTC. Her experience in teaching spans large class teaching as well as small groups, blended learning, professional development, and training. She was awarded Senior Fellowship with the Higher Education Academy in 2019. Debra is also a registered psychologist and experienced counselor who has specialized in working with adolescents and young adults and has a keen interest in supporting personal and career development. Debra's research combines her clinical practice interests and expertise in teaching, including higher education, counseling education, and professional development, student mental health, and well-being. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Debra Arth.
Thank you so much for that. Like Bronwyn, I feel almost like, is that really me? Thank you so much for having me as part of the event today. I'm actually quite humbled. I was asked to represent Griffith because my lovely colleague, Jonathan Munro, Head of Student Counselling, couldn't be here today. So I'm in lieu of Jonathan. But it gives me great pleasure to talk about, these issues because, we all know how important it is and it will continue to be. So I just thought I would give you a little bit about what we've been doing at Griffith to try and respond to the pandemic and the ensuing, things that have happened. And like Bronwyn said, we actually were already in the throes of rolling out a mental health and wellbeing strategy before the pandemic hit. And so call it timely or whatever, but we had already started to do some serious work in rolling out a new strategy in building and making better use of the resources that we do have, as well as building new resources and connections across the university to support student mental health. And so, I'm sure that our university is not any different to any other university. We experienced an unprecedented spike in student support needs once COVID struck. If you talk to academic staff, they'll talk about up to a 500% or more increase in, assessment extension requests, special consideration requests, including students just dropping out or not submitting their work and under, an incredible amount of pressure. We also experienced a much more vocalized student feedback, revealing really the impact of the stresses that they were experiencing. And this was particularly in relation to a very quick change to course delivery, moving from what was very much an on-campus in many respects delivery format to completely online, leaving them quite confused and with a lot of uncertainty, particularly not only with the university, but more locally and nationally as well, having to try to respond to the changes in policy that were being rolled out, every day almost at times. And, the impact of that and the personal stresses, not only on students' study demands, but also the changes in their own personal life. And I think in particularly, there's a lot of disconnection, family disconnection, friendship disconnection, and then the disconnection from campus and their peers and the academic and other staff. And so the upshot really was that for many students, particularly those who were first years in 2020, the university experience just did not deliver. They came fresh-faced and excited to be a university student, and that identity just didn't roll out in the way that they expected. And so we're trying to respond to that now and to make the university experience as positive as it can be. So I thought I would just talk about a couple of things that we've done in response. One of the initiatives that I was directly involved in, I'm the program director for the Bachelor of Counselling degree at Griffith. And so we also experienced a lot of student distress around placements in their final year. As you can imagine, there was a point during lockdown for a few months there that we had no students out on placement. And so that caused a lot of stress. So I was able to collaborate with other allied health folk at the Griffith Health Clinics, and as well collaborated with Jonathan Griffin as head of the student counselling service to develop a triage counselling service that actually was operated by our some final year counselling students, so that they got a placement experience, as well as being able to provide a really crucial service to the Griffith student community. It was very much a short-term support service to students, which was based on a stepped care kind of model of intervention, where we had a strong focus on referral and connection to other support services and opportunities within the university community, but also in our local community. And that included, things like peer mentoring, support groups, as well as the various health and medical and other support services. And we had, quite a lot of uptake, particularly with international students, not surprisingly. I think one of the values of that service was that it was actually run by students for students, and so there was an immediate sense of connection and shared understanding about what was happening for them as a student. The other thing that I feel that we did quite well was that a team of academic developers and academic staff developed a framework for teaching, design and delivery. And that framework was a framework of care and compassion with 7 principles, and that really put a focus on a set of shared values around decision making for teaching and learning, where we prioritised care and compassion for students and their family, as well as care and compassion for others, and really trying to increase that sense of connection and a focus on boosting that social and student resilience, particularly in the online environment and the constant change. I think we're all a little bit burnt out on change and having to adapt to change. And so a whole set of resources and dissemination activities occurred around that framework of teaching with care and compassion. And just finally, my comments about recovery. As a counsellor and a psychologist, of course, I can't not think about this in relation to my own discipline. And if you think about the impact of grief and loss, which of course there's a lot of grief and loss since COVID, just in terms of the loss of what we had in terms of, loss of connection, loss of the way of doing life the way it used to be. And the longer term recovery journey from any loss event is really not what we would expect. It's not just a nice upward return to recovery and functioning, but rather it's a journey of pits and peaks. And I think for many students and their families, and for staff as well, the impact of COVID wasn't really as significant until this year, particularly in terms of financial burden and the real impact of the ongoing disconnection from family, from their usual activities and so forth. And so 2020 was certainly a year of intensity, but the fallout is very much ongoing and will continue to be so, I think, for quite a while. And I think the importance of relationship is really important, is something that we need to hold on to, particularly in our virtual world. And, we're connecting wonderfully here in our virtual world today, but all of the research tells us about the importance of connection and relationship in terms of mental health and in terms of positive outcomes for people who seek counselling and psychotherapy interventions. And there was an interesting study that was just recently published from a Canadian university that looked at the students who had engaged in their counselling services, and they found that there was a really significant relationship between the strength of that therapeutic alliance with the counsellor and an improvement in academic grades. And they talked about how important it was to really think about that sense of connection and how we can really utilize that in what is very much a changing and now very much online world. So I think that that's a real challenge for us to move forward with. I think also it's really important to highlight, we were talking about this earlier just before we started, about staff wellbeing and, the contagion of supporting students who are highly stressed, but also dealing with their own personal stress and the impact of COVID. And it's the kind of the metaphor of the oxygen mask on a plane, you kind of, the grown-up has to fill their mask first before they support the others. And I think it's really important that we don't forget about staff wellbeing in all of this. It's just absolutely just as important as student wellbeing. So that's it from me, I think. Looking forward to hearing from other people.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Barth, for being here with us and for sharing your insights and support. So a token of appreciation will be posted to you today. So now I would like to invite Miyo Ihashi. So Miyo Ihashi is a counseling psychologist who studied at Monash University as an international student. She started working at counseling and mental health programs at Monash University in 2006, and she has extensive clinical experience in working with young people and developing and delivering mental health literacy programs. Miyo is an accredited mental health first aid instructor and coordinates the program at Monash. She is passionate about reducing the stigma of mental health and changing culture to facilitate early help seeking in young people. So it is my pleasure to welcome Miyo Ihashi.
Thanks, Christina. Am I able to share screen?
Yes.
Oh, okay. It's not much, but it sort of helped me with my talking points, so that'll be great. So thank you for my introduction, Christina, and thank you for opportunity to speak amongst the esteemed colleagues. I was connecting with Jim on LinkedIn, and I was saying to him, this sounds like a really good opportunity to learn from my peers from the sector, tertiary sector, because last year was, unprecedented times. It's really becoming the kind of buzzword, unprecedented. That meant each university, each counselling service kind of have to think on our feet and adapt with all the changes. So I'd love to learn from other universities. So how mental health needs changed during the COVID. So Monash had a Thrive project, which is university-wide initiative for design with the students and staff. So this was led by Professor Kim Cornish in School of Psychology in the Faculty of Medicine, Nursing and Health Sciences. So it wasn't initiative started because of the COVID, but it's just to coincide with the pandemic. So it provided really good insight and data around how students and also staff experiencing this unprecedented time. I'm going to repeat that word many times during these 5 minutes. So they ran 7 surveys in 2000, so combined in 2020 and 2021 in different times of the year. So they investigated around the points around academic challenges and concerns, COVID-19 related concerns, and mental health and physical health and cognitive health and exercise and lifestyle. So I guess in summary, overall, approximately 1 in 3 students reported low well-being throughout 2020. And thankfully, so this sort of improved towards December when they ran the survey in December, because that also again coincided with the last year's lockdown ending. But they're going to run another one, I think, the later of the year, and it will be really interesting to see. So in a lot of things that I find it really interesting from this survey was 40% of students reported they're concerned about their thinking and memory and the focus and concentration. So they're really concerned about their cognitive function, which is vital for being a student. And also 18% of students were not confident they would seek help even if they knew they needed it. So there's a stigma around seeking help, and I'm going to touch on a little bit in my next slides about, I guess this is maybe reflection of that a lot of students who never experienced mental health problems before, never thought about seeking help, suddenly find themselves needing help last year and this year. So that might be the reflection of that. This sort of hesitancy to seek help was more complicated with the international students because they're concerned about confidentiality, concerned about how that seeking help might affect their health insurance or their visa status. So there was sort of, I guess, a lack of information about, we provide a confidential support at university that would not affect their visa status or their health insurance. So overall, students seems to be more concerned about mental health impact on the COVID-19 rather than their physical health. So this is out of the survey. So next slide is about sort of my anecdote or like my observation. So as I said, probably the new and emerging mental health issues. So there's a lot of students who never thought about or never experienced mental health issues might find themselves having these issues. And on top of that, if you have an existing issue that would have been maybe escalated, deteriorated. For example, I had a student who had a trauma in a previous year, then they come back last year and developing the OCD type symptoms. So, you know, it was a very difficult time and still is that, you know, hygiene and cleanliness is really vital to protect us against from pandemic like a COVID-19. But, you know, where's the line between what you're quite concerned about these things and not even leaving the house or really afraid of going to the supermarket. So these are the things I have noticed in, and also the challenges of working from home. So yeah, you know, you live with a family or the housemate, and these things are quite okay arrangement in a normal times. But when everyone is being at home and I myself setting up my desk in my middle of the lounge, so you know, that sort of working space and your personal space kind of merging together can be quite challenging. And also I found the Zoom teaching, which, you know, really I credit to the educators at the university to be able to, you know, switch between online teaching to in-person teaching, because Monash also went back to on-campus teaching for a short period of time, but also Zoom teaching seems to kind of exacerbated the students' social anxiety. So these students who don't usually have a problem asking question in tutorial if it's in person, but they felt quite anxious drawing themselves attention in a Zoom call. So that meant that they might have a missed opportunity to actually ask question in the class. Isolation and loneliness is probably quite obvious because we are still in lockdown, and hopefully the end is coming on Thursday. Telehealth, it's really helpful that we were able to still provide the service by telehealth but there's a pros and cons again. So a lot of people are working from home, sharing space with other people, so they might not have a sort of privacy. But pros are also that we probably reduced a lot of rate of no-show appointments, so that was really good. And also another challenge was the support for international students, because most of our staff are registered psychologists, and our registration had a sort of limitation around who we can provide the support for. So these are the challenges that we never sort of anticipated. So how university supported students, so we start providing telehealth appointments. We also provide counseling help online. This is sort of the not the live online support, it's more the email correspondence type of support, but it's become sort of the gateway for students to make an appointment for counseling, because another things we noticed was young people are not very big fan of making phone calls. They're really anxious about making phone calls. So counseling help online actually, you know, the counselor is actually calling student and on behalf of them making appointments. We also have a mental health nurse on site, and this wasn't particularly because of the pandemic. We started having mental health nurse on site for working crisis situation, and it's happened to coincide with the pandemic, and it was also helpful. I'm just going to be mindful of the time. So yeah, so university-wide, so we had a grading consideration, so student can sort of opt in to either withdraw from the units if they fail and not count towards their WAM and GPA. They can also opt in to become satisfactory faculty requirement grade. So they are still marked as pass, but not as a fail, and contribute towards WAMs and GPA. And also university provided financial grants, which was also essential, particularly for international students who weren't eligible for government support for that. What needs to be considered during post-pandemic recovery? I am in Melbourne. I think some of the panels is in Melbourne, so we are about to come out of lockdown. So we have to be really mindful about, you know, the individual differences. Some people are really excited about opening up and go out and see people, but some people are still feeling quite wary about that. So we have to be really respectful of that. And also previous panelists commented on long-term effects on mental health. We don't really know how that's going to be affecting our mental health in the long run. So yeah, I think we have to watch the space for that. And I think we continue to provide different options to access counselling, because we did learn that telehealth is not the same as a face-to-face appointment, but it's still quite good. And we, you know, different, you know, kind of connection to in person, but it was still quite effective. So continue to provide different options might be really important. And also at our service, we did increase the maximum number of the session from 6 to 10. So we've been always saying that we're a short-term counselling service, but you know, you also are aware that in community there's a 6-month wait list to see psychologists. You know, so the wait list, and some psychologists closing their books. So if we can kind of provide a little bit longer support for students to kind of until they might be linked in with another support, I think it's a really important thing for us to do. So that's the end of my slides. So thank you very much. And I'll be really looking forward to hearing more from the other panelists. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Miyo, for sharing your insights. It's really interesting that you talked about how students are concerned. Thank you, Miyo, for your insights. It's really interesting to hear that you said students are more concerned about their mental health compared to their physical health. And you said over 40% are concerned about their thinking and memory. That's really, you know, I find that really insightful, but we'll look forward to having you at the panel discussion to talk further. So a token of appreciation will be posted to you. So thank you so much. So on that note, I would now like to invite Vicky McCoy. Vicky McCoy has worked at the University of Adelaide since 1998, starting in a student advocacy role, moving through general counselling support and into her current role as the manager of counselling services. Her background is in social work, and prior to commencing work in the university sector, Vicky worked primarily in youth settings across state and federal government departments. Vicky is passionate about supporting students to thrive and find their place in the community, both in terms of a study focus and in terms of their well-being. Over the many years Vicky has been at the University of Adelaide, she has developed an excellent understanding of the pressures faced by students and the challenges that can affect student mental health. So please join me in welcoming Vicky McCoy.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction, Christina. Appreciate it. I hope everyone can hear me. If you can't, please just let me know. I'm kind of conscious I might be going over some things that people have said, but I'm talking from our perspective, and so I'll run through what I've written and I'll be looking up and down a little bit, so I apologise. I was asked sort of like, I'll go through the questions sequentially. So in terms of the sort of changing mental health needs, I'll be echoing a little bit of what you said, Miyo. I've certainly noticed, and we have noticed here at counselling, an increase in anxiety, and that's broadly speaking across the board. So, but specifically, we've kind of interestingly seen there's probably been a few more cases of people coming in with more of that phobic stuff in relation to health, which is really interesting. Probably not unreasonable to expect in this context. Along with that is depression, which notably, has increased over the last wee while and is connected to grief as well. And I think touching on what you said, Miyo, there about memory, depression and grief notoriously rob people of their concentration, their memory, and that kind of cognitive functioning that is often very worrying. So the things tend to cycle around and build on each other. So changed circumstances, concern about future. And I think what we're seeing emerging a little bit at the moment is some more trauma around that. It's the best word I can come up for. It's probably not the extreme end of trauma, but certainly people feeling kind of that impacted by a range of different factors that are making them present in a way that is quite that more extreme level of anxiety. I feel this is sort of linked to that more complex grief, particularly for our international students where they've been away from families and they haven't been able to go through the normal processes, and even our interstate students where they haven't been able to process grief in the way that we would want them to process that, by being able to be with families, by being able to go through rituals and things that would help them support that. And that's been impacted further, I think, by some of the things that are happening in the world at the moment. War, displacement, political upheaval, natural disasters. For some of our students, that's been another layer of things that have added to those mental health presentations. So our university adapted, I think, similarly to what some of you have said as well. We made changes to grading. We rapidly rolled out programs online for students. All of our courses went online essentially. We've adapted our technology. We've continued to do that. In terms of resources that we offer, we're offering more webinars. We're offering a lot more stuff online for students and for students who are offshore. And in our counselling as well went online as well. So we've gone to any kind of virtual appointments or phone appointments, which we were doing as, but obviously we've gone much more consistently to that where students want that. We have around 4,000 students offshore at the moment, so it's a concern for us and something that we are conscious of maintaining that way of connecting with them. And like Miyo mentioned, I think it's worth me mentioning as well, one of the issues is finding a way to work offshore when your professional bodies do not advise you to do that. So whilst I employ social workers and psychologists, both professional bodies advise, either directly in the case of psychology against operating offshore, and ethically, essentially with social workers too, and with the concerns there are for not being able to support people if there are risk issues when they're offshore. So I think some of the things to consider coming out of this, what we might consider post-pandemic, are the issues of isolation and the effects of isolation, and that decreased connection that people have had. We've had a lot of young people coming into uni now who have solidly for a couple of years been kind of in some form of isolation, sometimes quite isolated, and I think that's going to really impact how they reconnect and what we need to do to really get people reconnecting. We know connection is so important when people are anxious and depressed, and that's what we're seeing more of, and everything's been set up in a way that's made people feel more isolated, I think. So that's going to be a big step up, I think, to get people back in. I think that's been particularly concerning for people who already were socially anxious or were perhaps ASD, or where they've got, some of the personality disorders that sort of need that extra support. So we're seeing some of that come in now. I think that governments are going to have to look at how they increase funding into mental health. We have a little bit of that happening, but we're finding that services external to our university here in South Australia are very much maxed out. We find that it's very hard to get people into other services. We appreciate that the government extended the numbers of sessions available for in some situations, and that's been really, really helpful. But on the other end of that, it has meant that people aren't available, and we're finding, that even big agencies like Headspace are telling us that they have month-long wait lists, and when they're one of the main go-to services and one of the biggest funded services, that's quite concerning. So we need to look at really good evidence-based short-term therapy, I think, which, most of the university services have probably gone into that space because we've needed to be able to maintain the support we want to for all our students. But I think that's a space that could be through some of the government support that could be more enhanced, and we could look at that as an area of study. I think that really good mental health triaging services need to be in place for all states. We have a triage service into our universities. I think most services do, but I think the centralised state services need to be really strongly supported and continue to be strongly supported, and we certainly feed that back to our state government. And I think that it's, and this has been touched on, I heard by others as well, that it really is a concern. I think COVID was a real leveller. So, you know, it affected everybody. It affected staff, it affected students. So we're all coming out of this in some ways in a place where very few of us have been untouched in some way. You know, a lot of people have been isolated from families. A lot of people have experienced grief through this. So we really need to be mindful of how we support people broadly and how we continue to do that really well. I think we don't want people leaving the sector at the moment. We really want to keep our good staff and our good counsellors working and feeling supported, but we really need to ensure our students are feeling really well supported when they are here and when they come back. So that was sort of, I think, having listened to others, I think I've covered most of the additional kind of points that I had there. So thank you. I'm really pleased to be here too. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. Thank you. That was really insightful to hear, especially on the long wait list to access mental health support for our students. So we look forward to having you on our discussion panel to discuss further. A token of appreciation will be sent to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I would now like to introduce Professor Mitchell Byrne. Mitchell is Professor of Psychology and Discipline Lead at Charles Darwin University. Professor Mitchell is an endorsed clinical and forensic psychologist with over 35 years continuous applied practice. His research traverses a multitude of areas, including the role of omega-3 fatty acids in supporting self-regulation, enhancing school social inclusion of children with autism, drivers of inappropriate antibiotic use, and medication adherence. So please join me in welcoming Professor Mitchell.
If there's a problem, Christina, with Professor Mitchell, perhaps we move to Morris instead.
Okay, let's do that. Okay, so we have here now, it is my pleasure to introduce and welcome Neil Morris. Neil Morris holds a Director Wellbeing position within academic and student life at UNSW Sydney. Neil has had a long career within UNSW Sydney, holding several positions, including Vice President, Campus Life and Community Engagement during period. He was also Chair of UNSW Global, Executive Director, University Services, and Director, Human Resources. His current portfolio encompasses a broad range of outside the classroom student engagement roles, such as sport and the engagement with local community, student health, safety and well-being, including international student support, student cultural, artistic and religious life, student accommodation and residential colleges, and he manages the relationship with the UNSW student organization called ARC. So please join me in welcoming Neil Morris.
Thanks very much, Christina. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Good, great. I thank you for that introduction. I made it deliberately long and cumbersome to make up for the fact that on this esteemed group, I'm probably the only true university bureaucrat. But I do have the psychology, wellness, health, safety and wellbeing teams in my portfolio. And I've just dropped into the chat a student mental health strategy that we at UNSW are about to launch next week. And the kind of spin I want to put on that for the next 3 or 4 minutes is to cover the ground that everybody else has covered. But this strategy was probably ready to be launched 12 months ago. And, you know, we've taken the kind of last 6 months of the COVID lockdown as an opportunity to rework that strategy in a very student-centric way to make sure that we're not just having a strategy that will serve us well for the next 5 years in student mental health, but something that we've built on from our COVID experiences and all of those things that were talked about, particularly just then by Vicky, but also by Debra and Bronwyn, about that additional isolation that students have suffered over the last 12 to 18 months, how that has impacted on their mental health and how their needs are changing. So we've been able to kind of, if you like, in real time, make sure that we rework the strategy so that it's going to deliver not only a long-term outcomes for our student body, but also as we emerge out of lockdown and hopefully in 2022 emerge back with international students on campus and face-to-face learning. So where did all this come from? It started, we used PricewaterhouseCoopers back in 2018 to do a deep dive into student mental health on campus. Of course, what they came up with was lots of the statistics that you will all be very aware of and that came out of the Origin report as well. Things like 1 in 4 of the UNSW student body will at some stage during their studies have a difficult mental health episode. The statistics though were really alarming for us. Our counselling team was seeing about 1,000 students every 6 to 8 weeks. Probably unremarkable numbers for similar-sized universities. But when you dived into those stats a little more, we'd find that 30% of those students presenting to our counselling team were presenting with some form of having suicidal ideation. And 10 to 12% of those students were at the very high end of distress in the K10 chart. So we had some quite brutal statistics to deal with. We also had some brutal findings from the PwC report, whereby they were saying that there was great pockets across the university of well-meaning people at faculty and central level dealing with student mental health issues, but that you had no strategy, no plan and no coordinated approach. So in drafting our strategy, which was very student-led, we had by that time the opportunity to shape the strategy using the Origin report and also the Australian Productivity Commission report into mental health that had quite a detailed part on tertiary education. So what we came up with in our strategy was the need for there to be a strong step care model. And this again is something that we've been able to really work on over the last couple of months in lockdown. The idea that at the front end of the university student mental health service delivery model, that you're having a strong self-management piece, self-help information and resources and mechanisms, and making it very clear to first year students and all students, but particularly first year students, that it's actually okay to find yourself in a post-secondary learning environment really struggling with new ways of learning. So we've had campaigns around the OK to fail. We've even had our Vice-Chancellor, who was a professor of surgery, who came out to the student body and said, I failed Anatomy 1 back in England, and I worked with the student resource, with the university's resources to find out where I was having some of those blocks in my studies and finding ways around it. So that self-help information and self-help resources at the front end of the step care model were really important in our strategy. Then, of course, moving up through your low intensity care, your moderate intensity care, where we have the GPs and the psychological help, and then high intensity care, and then the complex cases. Like a lot of my colleagues who've spoken so far today, we found that some students really liked telehealth and telehealth models. We found that there was a great thirst in the student body to start conversations around mental health, and some of the student societies like Student Minds at UNSW, that's been very active over many years, have kind of doubled in size over the lockdown. So we're trying to make sure that the conversation about student mental health is well ventilated, well understood, and owned by the student body. We actually would like, at the end of this strategy implementation, to be something within the UNSW graduate attributes that talks about student mental health as being understood. So if you finish at UNSW with a degree, if that's medicine, architecture, fine arts, you will have a really good understanding of your own resilience, mental health triggers and stresses, but you'll also have an understanding of how to identify where colleagues, other students, and potentially in the workforce, people might be having mental health difficulties, how to identify that. So a graduate attribute around mental health is something that we look looking to introduce. And of course, the other thing we've found is that over the last couple of months, I think UNSW has something in the vicinity of 12,000 students studying offshore. How we bring those students back, with all of the comments that some of my colleagues have made previously, will be a big challenge for us. Thanks, Christine.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, so thank you so much for sharing our insights. We look forward to having discussions with you later on the panel discussion session. So a token of our appreciation will be posted to you. So we will now progress to the panel discussion session. So it is my great pleasure to invite MHFA's Vice Chairperson, Jim Goodin, to moderate today's panel. So if you have any questions for our panel members, please feel free at any time to write them in the chat section. Over to you, Jim.
Good, thank you, Christina. I hope you can hear me and less fortunately see me. Am I coming through quite clearly?
Yes, Jim.
Good, thank you, thank you. Look, firstly, I do want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people on whose land I speak, and pay my respects to past, present and emerging leaders in Indigenous communities. Firstly, I want to say how delighted I am to have such a range of expert panelists. I can't imagine a more knowledgeable group to help us learn the vital messages, and I think we have learned many of the vital messages regarding mental health in our universities, and aiding our understanding in the issues, and hopefully better addressing them as a result of this forum. This will be recorded, and this will be not only shown to the many people that are watching currently, but it will be a resource and a reference well into the future. So I thank you very, very, very much for that. Now, the panel will also take virtual questions, as well as pre-sent questions. And I have many, many pre-sent questions. So hopefully we'll be able to get to some of the Q&A function questions. And people, if you wish to ask a question, use the Q&A function. We may not be able to answer them all or even any of them, but we'll certainly try. And if you wish to address your question to a particular panelist, please make that clear in your question. And panelists, please, let's make this an open discussion. Feel free to add your own insights and experiences at any time during the questions raised. I'll start off with a preset question. How long are waiting lists to see university counsellors currently? How are you managing this, especially as so many students are still off campus? We've had some discussion of this, but what would be the average waiting period for your students to see a counsellor within the university itself? Would anyone like to go first on that?
I'm
yes,
happy.
Please.
I'm happy to, Jim. I know this will vary a lot from university to university, but I think I can say I know that universities work really hard to keep our wait times down. That's something we're always constantly looking at. So we have about a 2-week wait at the moment, which is not too bad. But usually within that, I have same day appointments available. We try to reserve appointments. And then in addition to that, we have our triage staff. So I've sectioned off a part of my team so that we can see people if they're needing immediate support or if they walk in, so we can address immediate issues and then work out what we need to do with them longer term. So we work pretty hard to make sure that if people do contact us, we can see them. Usually that day if it's really needed, but within a short space of time. But it varies. You know, it can get quite difficult. You know, at different times of the year, that's good. That blows out because you know people need things urgently, and that it's an ongoing feast.
And some of our speakers have said that currently you're undergoing particularly a stressful time in terms of dealing with people requiring help. I see you, Miyo, you're nodding your head. Would you like to have a comment about that?
Sure. We have a similar situation to Vicky. So we do offer same day appointment. So, but we don't sort of keep the record of wait list. So we usually encourage students to, well, if you call around 8:30, 9-ish, we usually have a same day appointment. If the student call later time of the day and all the same day appointments being taken up, we also have a triage nurse because we are part of the health service. So triage nurse would speak to the student, make an assessment. And as I also said, we have a mental health nurse. So if they couldn't get into the same day appointment, they can be also offered a callback service from the mental health nurse.
And of course, you're all having the same trouble that we're having at the Mental Health Foundation. Many psychologists have simply closed their books because they're totally flooded for the next 6 months or so. So that's very difficult. Neil, how is University of New South Wales coping?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jim. Strangely, I think coping a little better than we might have previously, and that's partly because we're coming off the back of a $7 million business case investment into student mental health, which has allowed us to set up what the PwC report that I talked about previously was calling a campus care response and triage team. And that's a 4-person team. They're a crack unit, and 24/7 is their mantra. So that's allowed us to do a quick triage on students. And so where people in distress need to be directed for an immediate service, we can find the right place for them at the right time. So that sort of standalone triage team is important, but I think partners are important as well. You know, we've just done another 6-year deal with Medibank as our overseas healthcare provider, insurance for international students. And we've used them to set up an offshore in-language psychology provision for all of our offshore students, just because, you know, that's a big cohort, and they sometimes suffer the same distress offshore as if they were onshore. So I think partners is a big one. Universities can't do this stuff on their own.
What about staff?
Could I quickly add to that, Jim, just to echo some of, I guess, what Vicky and Miyo have said about their service model at RMIT. I know we just had some conversations with our staff counselling manager, Jeremy Cass, and others. So I think it's really phenomenal that, you know, wait lists are under 2 weeks, which, you know, so often counselling services, that's the first kind of pressure point question that gets asked around service delivery. And I think, you know, 2 weeks is phenomenal. At the moment for RMIT, we're tracking at about 10-day wait list, and similar to other services, we have on-day appointments as needed and an intake service. We've also got welfare advisors to sort of triage other matters around finance and accommodation. And I think, you know, the things that have really helped us to try to shift that dial from that, you know, downstream focus to more, you know, intervention and promotion work are around building that capability of how to support and assist each other when in distress. So we catch things early before they need counselling or psychological intervention, and to introduce a staff line, which is for academic and professional staff to call and say, I've got this student who I've noticed X, Y, and Z. What do I do to enable our people to be able to provide some of that early support rather than defaulting to counselling? But even if they did default at this point, it's such an incredible service to have that, you know, the responsivity of that compared to what we might get in public mental health or indeed in community health services is I think something our sector can be quite proud of.
Far better to have the ambulance at the top of the cliff rather than the bottom. I quite agree. Deborah, do you have any comments about that?
No, just I guess very much in line with what people are saying, that, you know, what we're trying to do, and I think what we have to continue to do is to create a much more coordinated effort where the reliance isn't just on sending students to student counselling, but actually I think also upskilling staff, and not just academic staff, but other staff, you know, around how to provide information referral to students that they might identify. And I think that, you know, taking much more of a community approach to support, I think, is going to be what we need to do in the long run, because, you know, so that sorts of services like counselling services don't drown under the pressure. Yeah.
And you used the expression that of the oxygen mask on the plane, which I think is a very vivid analogy that you know, the carers must be well themselves before they can cope with the problems of others. Do you see many carers such as yourselves? How much stress are you people under?
Oh, look, I'm sure that I wouldn't be the only one saying that, you know, academic staff are really they were already under pressure, and then this is just becoming even more so because they're at the front line of having to manage a lot of change. And so, and also then managing the students' response to all of that change as well. And often they bear the brunt of that, particularly sessional staff. We were talking about that before the forum started today. You know, I think it's actually a really significant issue that if we don't attend to it, it's going to create a lot more trouble for everyone, for all of us, you know, in terms of how well our universities function. So, yes.
Welcome, Professor Byrne. I obviously suspect that we had some IT problems. The virtual world is not without its difficulties, as we know. So we'll just throw you into the panel discussion, if that's all right. Do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
Well, I've just come in, so I don't know what's already been said, and I apologise for that, but you're absolutely right. The virtual world can sometimes throw us a left swing. Only that, generally speaking, I think we need to put into context students' mental health and wellbeing in the context of more broadly understood normality of mental health problems, and the current stresses that students might be experiencing have to be understood outside of the COVID framework as well as within the COVID framework. It's always been there. Mental health difficulties have always been there. It's just exposed to all those mental health difficulties because of the challenges that have been raised.
Good, thank you for that. Another question that's come in is that some students may refrain from seeking help in fear that it may appear on their official records, that there's a stigma that students are fearful of. How can we encourage students to seek help, given this mindset that it might in some way be recorded, that, and I know this applies not just to student populations, but to just about anybody that's seeking mental health assistance. How do you deal with that? I'll just throw that as an open question to anyone who'd wish to answer.
Yeah, I'm happy to make a comment on that, Jim.
Please.
Look, I think the way you frame it is that help seeking is a positive aspect of anybody's behaviour. That if we understand that we have that insight into our own particular needs, we can actually have a greater respect for the person's capacity to work through whatever particular discipline they might be involved in. But help seeking is a capacity, not a problem, and we need to recognise and support that as that sort of self-management, insightful behaviour that we actually want from our new graduates.
Good, good. Thank you for that. Anyone else like to make a comment? Bronwyn, I think you, oh yes, we've got Bronwyn and Miyo, please.
Oh, sure, we'll both jump in. I'll just share a little bit about, I guess, how we're beginning to tackle that at RMIT. Because, you know, it requires a longitudinal approach, and there are definite differences between different populations of students around help seeking and supporting each other in distress. So I think for us, we've begun to build that capability around how to support each other when in distress, and that's become part of a blended learning approach. So there are modules called Mental Wellbeing Essentials available for students, and also a parallel course for staff that are promoted through different points of the academic year and for different student populations. So for instance, in our orientation program, that program is referred to, just to sort of set the tone for the culture of the organisation as an expectation. You know, mental health and wellbeing is part of your university experience, and these are some of the very foundational basics that you need to know about that in this community. But then I think it's moving from that global level to local courses, and equipping teachers with the resources and assets that they need when they sort of begin in their course, to bring up a mental health pack, to remind students of, you know, what the supports are available, what the avenues are, you know, to try to reduce the stigma around help seeking, and to really clarify that communication, that it doesn't impact your academic record, you know, that it's a confidential service. And then the sort of third approach that we're taking, which is a more mental health promotion piece, cultural piece, is partnering with a youth organisation called Batir. So they're all focused on smashing stigma, and they go into the classroom and you know, bring lived experience into the classroom to share stories around help seeking, to try to just remove some of those barriers. So there's this sort of a suite of programs, and I think it does require a bit of a multi-pronged approach.
Yes, it does indeed. And stigma's the greatest issue, of course, in preventing people from seeking assistance for their mental health issues, as we're very aware of at the Mental Health Foundation. Miyo, you wanted to say something.
Yes, similar to what Bronwyn said about, I guess, we really focus on mental health literacy training. So we provide mental health first aid training for free for students. We charge staff, the employees, but we train a lot of the students for free, because we do know that from research, young people seek help from their peers before they actually go into the professional. So if we perhaps train peers, and a lot of them may have a leadership positions, like a residential advisor at the halls of residence, or they might have a peer mentors. And if we equip them with the right information, and then that would get then passed on to the other student who they might seek the help from.
Good, thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to make a comment on that? Yes, Debra, please.
Yeah, so I was interested when Neil was talking earlier about graduate attributes, and it strikes me as an opportunity to, many of you who've been around universities for a while will remember the big push around graduate attributes, a couple of decades ago. And I think this is perhaps an opportunity where we can revisit those and look at what, we were all espousing that we, produce in our students, that part of graduate attributes might be that capability around, self-awareness, help seeking and so forth. And part of that would be mental health literacy. But, that's perhaps one way that we can start to make this a much more normal part of, personal and professional development.
It is a learning opportunity. I mean, in grim circumstances, of course, but nevertheless, something beneficial could come from it if that attitude can be inculcated, amongst the student body. Just getting to, and I'm diverting from my script here because I have a lot of questions, I can assure you. Neil, you raised some very concerning figures. About 30% of students had suicidal ideation that you'd come in contact with, and 10% were in the top area of the K10 distress levels. Those figures are really quite startling. Is there anyone else? Well, please, would you like to talk about that first of all?
Startling indeed, Jim. Yeah, big numbers. You think about the size of the student population in a large Australian university, 60,000+ students. We have a list, weekly of students that we're case managing very, very closely. To me, one of the credits in this amazing export industry of Australian higher education, one of the amazing things is each of our psychology, wellness, counselling, whatever term we have, teams, because they take these distressed students through a care program that, 999 times out of 1,000 leads to that student getting the awarded degree and succeeding in their university studies and then moving on. It's kind of that unknown factor. I guess I'm saying that the ones that are coming to see the psychology and wellness team, I feel really good about. It's the ones that aren't. And that's why I think the literacy and the ability to come forward is such a powerful thing that we've got to concentrate on.
Yep, absolutely.
Yes, Neil, my director recently forwarded us the YouTube video link from the UNSW. There's a student with a lived experience. He talked about he had a suicidal ideation and he got help, and that was really inspiring, and it was a really well done video. It doesn't look like it's a lot of production value, bells and whistles, but it was really a message really clear.
Thanks, Mia. We've got a few of those sort of lived experience stories that the mental health team and the health promotion team here have put together. They're really quite powerful, yeah.
All right. Look, I remember as a first-year student, I can say the University of La Trobe because we've got no one here from La Trobe University, so I can say this. But I can remember having great distress during my first year at La Trobe University and adjusting to student life, etc. And many of my student friends dropped out due to their inability to adapt to that life. What student group or groups have the greatest burden of distress in your universities, in your view? Are they the younger, newer entry students, or are they people finishing their degree, or are they in fact postgraduate students who are doing, highly stressful research at the end of a doctorate, for example? Any views on that from anyone?
Yeah, I'll raise my hand, Jim. Certainly from our perspective, we have quite a multicultural group of students.
The multicultural group.
Multicultural group, and a large number of Indigenous students as well.
Yes.
And part of the issue is cultural compatibility and ensuring not only are we aware of particular culturally specific demands. So for international students, for example, the expectations from home and the financial investment that people have made in getting the students to a position where they can study in an Australian university, but also finding a place within an alien culture. And then, of course, for First Nations peoples, they're receiving a program that's not always culturally nuanced and certainly not delivered in language. And that can be very stressful for the students as well. So I think when we start thinking about stresses, and as I mentioned before, stress and mental health challenges are endemic in the community, and we shouldn't expect students to be different. They have additional stresses and strains placed upon them, which exacerbate those vulnerabilities. And then when you layer on top of that, issues about fitting in, cultural acceptability, being able to find the right peer group, being able to understand the cultural context in which their program is being delivered, we have those additional problems that we need to deal with.
And given this break that a lot of multicultural and overseas students have had in their education and their re-emergence in campuses, their reintegration into campuses, what do you see as being some of the major challenges that you're going to face given this huge influx that appears to be quite imminent?
I think we have to set up some landing platforms for these people. We need to be aware. The starting point is for universities to be aware and prepared for these challenges that the students will have, and then having a place for these students to land. So not hitting them in the head with a shovel as soon as they get off the aeroplane, but rather saying, okay, there needs some time for assimilation is not the right word, but some time for cultural awareness for them and cultural awareness for us, and having a landing platform for places for people from India, for people, First Nations people, or people from the Asiatic region, where they can at least start to feel comfortable before they begin a new experience of a university education.
Yes, thank you. Is there any research currently to suggest the long-term impact of COVID and remote learning on the mental health of students? I know it's a very short time span since we've been confronted with this dilemma, but are there any emerging insights as yet in the research field as to how students are reacting or going to react? For example, I recently read a study which dealt with the effect of COVID-19 general lockdowns in France on student mental health, and it found that social support seemed to be the best protective factor for high levels of stress due to COVID. That seems a fairly obvious one, but are there others?
I don't know the comprehensive answer to that, Jim, but
I don't think there may not be one or two.
I'm in good company there. I guess two pieces I wanted to just reflect on. One is the ABS data coming out around some of the psychological distress across the past 18 months. And just it's really interesting data because it does demonstrate that the difference between the elevated levels when we had lockdowns in Melbourne versus when we didn't. And, you can see a very clear increase and elevation across pretty much every single measure of psychological distress that they captured. And then it returns back to the baseline levels a few months later once the lockdowns finish. So I think that's really interesting data to keep in the front of our minds, just to keep testing our assumptions of what we're, how we're making assumptions, and to keep collecting the information. And I think that speaks to the natural bounce back resilience recovery idea, which of course, as a clinical psychologist, we're looking more at the resilient growth type things, not just, we don't always want to bounce back to where we were, because that might not be where we want to be. But the other really awesome piece of work that I'm very proud to be participating in is a partnership with the University of South Australia. So we launched this year a mental wellbeing survey that utilises their lead indicator, the psychosocial safety climate. So looking at sort of the cause of and the culture that precedes some of the psychosocial risks that might be seen in an organisation and a community, like bullying and harassment outcomes, workload impacts, and that kind of stuff. So we've collected data during COVID. It was during a lockdown, the worst timing, but the lockdown continued, so lucky we didn't wait. And so we're really hoping that will begin to capture, and we can already compare it with universities across Australia, because they collected data in 2020 also for Australia, or it could be 2021. Anyway, we've got, the university sector has some great information on the impact of COVID this year and following. So we're hoping to track that over the years to come, and to see what impact that staff and students are experiencing around exhaustion, engagement, the mental wellbeing continuum, and the climate, and how if we can shift those levers that do impact on culture, like leadership support, prioritizing health over productivity, those kinds of principles, to see the impact that cultural shift might have on our outcomes. So watch this space.
Will indeed, and there are always lessons to be learned. Fortunate times like we're experiencing at the moment. Debra, you raised the point of peer mentoring and support groups. Now, this is a very interesting area for us at the Mental Health Foundation, because we consider ourselves to have really been pioneers with peer support groups and so on. I'm just wondering if you'd care to elaborate on those at your university and perhaps others too. Mental Health Foundation has for many years tried to establish peer support groups and for different groups within universities. We haven't been very successful so far, but we do run a lot of them ourselves outside of universities. What's the feeling about support groups?
I'll try my best to address that.
It'll be wonderful.
We do. One of the things that we've been trying to do, I think, is to grow, not only grow the opportunities for peer support, but also to make it more accessible. And I know that we have a thing called Griffith Mates, which is a peer support program, particularly for international students. And so one of the things that the triage counselling service that I talked about us providing is very much about looking at connecting students with existing opportunities and a range of opportunities. So taking that kind of stepped care approach. So even though you might have a student who's quite distressed and in need of psychological, more kind of formal psychological intervention, you're also upskilling them with opportunities for a whole range of different ways in which they can, not only get support for themselves, but engage in their kind of social community as well. I think that's really important. So we have a range of different, and I probably don't even know all of them, but we certainly have a lot of, one particularly with international students, but we also have peer support programs with our student guild or student associations, where they provide, the volunteer students who provide, mentoring to other students. And I think that that's quite successful, and they get involved in a range of different things. Just recently, they've hosted some really successful opportunities to connect, with Are You OK Day in particular, as well as Mental Health Week. So yeah, it's just about trying to utilize the resources that we do have in more effective and efficient ways, I think.
All right. Now, look, I'm greatly distressed at the moment. I'm rating very high in my distress levels because, unfortunately, we've ended the nominated time for our discussion. But I'm going to push it 5 minutes and just ask a single final question. I have so many questions that I could ask and wish to ask. So I'm terribly sorry that we haven't gotten to all of them. But I am just going to ask a question of what is your top recommendation to policy makers about the mental health of universities, of students and staff? If you had one essential message that you would like to communicate to the chancellors, if you like, of the universities, what would it be? Can I take each of you in turn? Perhaps Vicky, you can be the lucky first, if you would be so kind.
I think it would be to continue to invest in a university-wide strategies. So for staff, for students, things that are at multi-levels. We've talked a bit about stepped care and training and investing in supporting students in a range of different ways. I think that needs to be across the university. So we have a population that are used to learning. I think we need to go with that and continue to expand on that. So mental health strategies, really invest in that.
Thank you. Neil?
Yes, and probably building on Vicky's point, get these people on this panel at the policy decision level, Jim, at the earliest stage. Let's stop building student accommodation of 9 square metre rooms with no balconies when we've just proven to ourselves 12 or 13 square metres with a balcony is undeniably so much better for student mental health.
Very, very practical. And usually the practical considerations are the most important, aren't they? What you can do at the chalk face, so to speak. Miyo.
The CFOs don't always agree, Jim, but...
I'm sorry?
I said the CFOs don't always agree, but...
The CFOs are the bane of the world, aren't they? Let's face it. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that, but yes, Miyo.
Sort of similar vein, and always more funding to our service will be welcome. But I guess we have mental health nurse on our staff now, and their main sort of role is to sort of accommodate all the acute presentation, so without appointments. So that sort of reduce our sort of anxiety about having ongoing client load, and then also accommodating, responding to the acute presentation. That was really helpful. And also university wise, that the policies around the gradings and the how the special consideration will be assessed, and reducing that sort of stress around these bureaucratic procedure would be really great for great positive impact on students' mental health.
Thank you, Miyo. Mitchell?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I think, we assume as psychologists and mental health professionals that people have a reasonable understanding of mental health issues and the variety of mental health needs that exist. But university executive and leadership, and indeed faculty members outside of mental health, don't. So picking up on something I think that Miyo and Debra said before, in regards to mental health literacies, where we should start is enhancing the mental health literacies of the executive and of the decision makers, so that they understand and can appreciate at least a nuanced level what the needs of students and staff, are. We can't expect them to behave in a reasonable way with the absence of knowledge. That's not reasonable of us. It's not reasonable of anyone. So we need to first of all invest in the decision makers' knowledge so that they can make decisions that are knowledgeable.
I think that's a really, really strong point and really valid one. Thank you so much for that. Debra?
Oh, look, I would absolutely agree with Mitchell. I think he's hit the nail on the head that, we talk a lot about mental health, but actually, I don't know the degree to which, the staff and particularly the decision makers at different levels really do understand the impact. I think it might have been Vicky, you were saying earlier too about the impact of grief and loss and on cognition and learning. I think it was Miyo as well. I don't think that that's something that's commonly known about. And that's such a crucial, important point if you're making a decision about whether a student gets more time and so forth. So yeah, I think absolutely mental health literacy, but and also very much highlighting that need to support staff and to recognise staff, and also to normalise. Neil, you talked about, failure. Everyone has had a failing moment, and to just, to normalise the difficulties that we all experience over time.
Thank you, Debra. Bronwyn?
Oh, so amazing. I think we should all be voted onto the boards.
I do too, absolutely.
I definitely agree with the internal commitment and prioritisation of having that whole of community joined up integrated strategic action planning, and to connect the dots with other pieces of work like reconciliation and responding to climate change, to not treat them as separate pieces of work. But I think also, just to add to the conversation, that external advocacy, being really proactive as a sector to work together, to rise together, not above each other, and to deal with some of the sort of determinants that undermine our health and well-being from an higher education perspective. And, you know, to keep doing, you know, radical times call for radical measures, you know, to be brave, to take some transformational change, not just the incremental change.
Look, thank you so much. This has been an excellent panel. I've really been thrilled to listen to all your comments. As I say, the benefit of it will continue on in perpetuity because it has been recorded. I'm going to have to go away and do some self-calming techniques, unfortunately, because I haven't been able to get through my total list of questions. So I'm very distraught. And Mitchell, I'm particularly distraught. I would have loved to have found out more about your omega-3 discoveries. That sounded quite fascinating. Perhaps I'll be doing some internet research and having a look at them this afternoon. Thank you all so much, and really appreciate your insights and your generous donation of expertise to this forum and to the Mental Health Foundation. And until we meet again, I'll leave you in the charming hands of Christina Chia. So goodbye to all of you, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. Just like you, I'm also distraught because, hi, Jim, can everybody hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, okay. Jim, just like you, I'm distraught as well because I'm still, you know, learning so much. And I thank you all, our amazing panelists, for such an important topic. You know, sharing your wealth of experience in our forum today. I wish we had longer time. I really enjoyed hearing all your presentations today. I must admit, in my role as the Chief Operating Officer of a national education business, it is certainly educational and uplifting to hear from all of you. What really stood out for me today is all your passions, your motivation and intentions to make a difference in the mental health space. I love the open and constructive conversation about what is working, what needs to be done, acknowledging that the pandemic is hard on everyone and how everyone in the university sector can collectively support each other during this unprecedented period. So to close our forum today, on behalf of Mental Health Foundation Australia, I would also like to thank our sponsors, Australian Unity, Chemist's Own and Food Solutions. I would also like to thank our speakers today for your contributions, for your time and participation today. And thank you, Jim, for moderating the panel discussion today. And I'd like to make a special mention to Anika, Nithya, and Aisha, who has been working really hard and closely with me on this forum, and the entire MHFA team. You are all super amazing. Thank you for your professionalism. And to our listeners today, thank you for your company. I hope you got something out of it. And thank you for your support to Mental Health Foundation Australia on its 19th day of National Mental Health Month. So stay safe, stay well, and stay strong. Have a lovely day.